In a previous video, I talked about how Rad Trad Inc. uses Marxist principles. Now, as I wrap up my monologue here, I'm going to point out 10 tenets of what I find to be their ideology. And then I'll bring on Laura from Rad Trad Recovery to get to their story. There are certain tenets one has to hold to belong to Rad Trad Inc. I'll give you the first 10 now, like I said. The first tenet, as I said, you have to believe that you're a victim and that you're being oppressed by Vatican II and all of its products. You must believe these things have harmed your life and that there's no way to escape being a victim than just by dissenting and resisting. These tenets I'm listing, they come in scales. They're purity tests. The more of them you hold, the more rad trad you are, right? And to be sure, every set of a contest went to bed as a rad trad and woke up the next day outside the church. All right. Here's a second. The second tenet of rad trad is that you have to believe that the Norvis Ordo Mass is either invalid, valid but sufficient, or if you're far extreme, borderline set of a contest, you have to believe that the Norvis Ordo Mass is a near occasion to sin. The third tenet of the rad trad religion. You must believe that any theological developments after the Council of Trent in the 1500s, especially after Vatican I, is modernism. Anything that the church taught between Vatican I and today is modernism, and it needs to be rejected. That includes Humanae Vitae, that includes the dogmatic constitutions, the Second Vatican Council, that includes the canon law from 1983. Anything in the catechism, we're not even going to go there. The theology of the body, I guess anything John Paul II did, St. John Paul II did. People who have been canonized since John Paul II, everything have to be rejected. The third tenet that is in line with the fourth tenet of the Rad Trad Inc., they have their own holy books. You are pure if you only use like the Dewey Reigns Bible. But in addition to that, your holy books are the Catechism of the Council of Trent, the Summa Theologia of St. Thomas Aquinas, and you must weaponize St. Thomas Aquinas against his own church at any opportunity against Vatican II modernism. If Aquinas didn't say it, it's not true. Rad Trad Inc.'s, their theological understanding stops about 500, 800 years ago. That's the last book of theology they read. This is why they kind of sound like low information when they talk, because the last catechism they read was in question and answer format. It didn't have footnotes or references. All right, here's the fifth tenet. Pope Francis is either not the Pope, he's anti-Pope, or is the Pope, but he must be resisted because he's a modernist, right? Purity test. Here's a purity test. If you call, this is the highest degree of the Rad Trad Inc. If you call Francis Bergoglio, you know, um, you're really pure, right? And resisting Francis doesn't have any limits either. You could say he should die. Put a millstone around his neck, right? Which leads to the sixth tenet. The Rad Trad cult leaders cannot be reprimanded publicly, right? They cannot be rebuked. Kennedy Hall is allowed to say the Norvis Ordo is an occasion of grave sin. And we have to agree with him, agree or disagree, right? Father James Altman can say, kill the Pope, drown him, throw him in the deep blue sea with a millstone around his neck. And we have to sweep that under the rug. SSPX priests can molest children as many as they want and be moved around to their parishes as needed. And we have to pretend it's not happening, right? Go ask Christine Niles about what's going on right now. The seventh tenet. Rad Trad Inc. has its own magisterium. They can rebuke popes, they can rebuke bishops, they can interpret magisterial documents however they want, and whatever they say is true. And to prove this, they will all invite each other onto their podcast and repeat the same lies to each other. Rad Trad Inc. is a very small circle. They all recycle each other as guests and they use each other as references. It's truly a safe space. It's kind of like liberals. You know how liberals believe in safe spaces? I don't know if they still do anymore. I haven't lived in the States in a little while. That's still going on, safe spaces. This is why they all leave the Norvis Ordo parishes instead of staying in them, trying to improve them, right? They always want to run to their safe space. Eighth tenet. You must repeat the myths of Rad Trad Inc. Here's one of the myths, one of my favorites. The traditional Latin Mass is growing. Let's do some math, right? How many parishes are in your average diocese? I don't know. Let's say 100, right? Of those 100 parishes, how many have the traditional Latin Mass? Two? Okay, if you have two out of 100, those two are going to be busting at the seams. It's going to look crowded. A lot of young families. And the other 98 are going to be kind of diluted. Let's flip. Give the traditional Latin Mass parishes 98, to give us Novus Ordo 2. Those Novus Ordo parishes are going to be busting at the seams like young families. It's a myth, but it has to be repeated to keep the victim narrative going. Another myth, the North American Catholicism. We have to believe that that's the norm of what's going on in the rest of the world, right? I didn't notice this until I left the states. Like, there's like it's weird how we think we're the center of the universe. There's a lot of stuff going on outside of North America, and as I said, it's dependent on how Catholic the culture is. It affects how strong the liturgy is, how strong the church is there, right? Ninth tenet. We don't evangelize with outsiders. Rad Trad Inc. are not people who live their faith outside of the Mass. These are not liturgical people. They want the safe space and talk to people who agree with them. So you never see them evangelizing anyone but Novus Ordo Catholics. In a way, Rad Trad evangelizes them is to make them feel bad about being a Catholic, making them feel like they aren't good enough, like their liturgy isn't good enough, uh, that they really don't love Jesus. You really don't love Jesus if you don't come to the traditional Latin Mass. What's that? Rad Trad Inc. is like victims in their way of evangelizing people is make other people feel like victims is sick. Tenet number 10. If you're white, the traditional Latin Mass is your birthright. I've read a number of essays of St. Dominic's Media about how the liturgy is liturgy is cultural. It is. The best examples I've written about, long essays I've written about the Carolingian kings and the Carolingian reforms, people like Pepin and Charlemagne. Yeah, they use liturgy in their version of the Roman rites as a cultural tool to make the Franks, make the Germans feel proud of being German. That's true. I see it all the time around here. Beautiful cathedrals. And they even tried at one point in time to export their liturgy to other places like Ireland and Spain, but countries rejected them because those countries like Spain, they had their own cultural liturgy that was unique to their location and their history. So yes, liturgy is cultural, or it used to be until the Novus Ordo. That's not cultural at all, I don't think. There's a lot of weird things about the Novus Ordo. And I explain a lot of those things in my book, The Divine Symphony. But I also write about how beautiful it is and about how all the liturgies of the church that are still being worked are beautiful because they all bring to one Jesus Christ. So I get the idea being promoted by people like Rad Trad Inc., Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, that the traditional Latin Mass is what it means to be of Northern European descent. But what does that mean about for the rest of us? So should we be surprised that tenet of Rad Trad Inc. is why the SSPS attracts many white identity racists? But again, that's the quiet part. We're not allowed to say out loud. We can't talk about that because that would destroy the victim narrative. That would destroy the myth.